We're on.
Well, good morning. It is Jason Thornton and Tim Rush. We're processing my sermon today, and we're just grateful to be with you all. As we've said, these are conversations that Tim and I would have either way, and so we're just putting them out there for to see whatever God would do with it, but just grateful that you'd be willing to tune in. I've had a good weekend. My wife's birthday was Friday. I do think with my wife's sensibilities, we celebrated it almost exactly like we celebrate it every year. She likes small groups and small events, and so I think I did well. She doesn't watch these, so I'm going to say I did spectacularly. And so I was just husband of the year there. But it was a good weekend, restful weekend, and like everybody, well, like so many of us, a lot of questions about how do we proceed and how's this going to go with opening of culture. But in general, feeling pretty positive about today. And so, how about you, Tim? How are you doing?
Pretty good. Had a good weekend. Lee Wills has started putting together a 55,000 piece puzzle, something like that. And so he's farmed it out to 20 different ones of us to get to do pieces, and then we'll all put it together. And my background is the puzzle that our family is trying to put together. So
that's just your section?
This is our section. And so we started on that this weekend. This is not a picture of the completed puzzle. This is a picture of what it will be.
Right.
So we had a lot of fun getting started, but then we started working in the yard. And looking back on it, I think, man, my kids worked so hard. It was really fun. But when we went out, we didn't say we're going to be out here for 6 hours. You know, we were like, hey, grab some shovels. Let's go do this. And then at the end of the day, and this happened Saturday and Sunday, I thought, did they have other stuff they wanted to do today? But it was super fun. Like we were digging a ditch at one point, and it's called a swell to get the water to flow away from the house. Every time it rains hard, our laundry room floods, and so we're digging a swell and building a berm. Nicer words than saying we're digging a ditch. And we're out there working, and at some point Kim goes, because we're building this mound across our backyard, and Kim goes, one day we're going to look out and see our grandkids playing on this. It was like, oh my goodness, yeah, we're making memories with our kids right now. So it was just a fun weekend, working in the yard and starting on a puzzle. It's a lot of fun.
That story right there it completely personifies the difference in your family and mine. And it all comes down to me as a leader. When I go outside, I am on the clock. If I have to mow my yard, I'm going out. If I notice, up to my house being on fire, if I notice something, I will say, that's what I'll do next week. If the windows are falling out of my house, if Heather doesn't notice, I'm like, that's work for next week, because I am on the clock and I see my influence being that way on my children and my family.
Man, I don't know what to tell you, because I am you. Like really? I am the exact. I don't know.
It's Kim's fault.
It's Kim's fault. It's Kim's fault.
Credit. It's Kim's credit.
Yeah.
Well, very good.
Yeah. In fact, we've been knowing we need to do this for a while, and man, this is confessional. Saturday we go out, and we're working on a raised garden, and Kim was working on that, and I was like, I'm just going to start digging this. Kids, grab shovels. We're just going to start digging this. And then everybody else had these ideas of why this isn't a good idea and what we ought to do differently. And I felt like I will sit and look at a project for months and not doing it. I'm out here saying I'll do it. We've got to do it. And we had to push pause, go back in the house, internet searches, what's the best way to do this? And ended up, it was good, because we moved it, we did it differently. But I just felt like I'm not good at this. If I'm saying I'll do it, we've got to take advantage of that, because
I would say the end of every project that I do alone ends with a statement, and he went to look at the internet.
Yeah.
And 20 minutes later, I'm like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
I love old cartoons or whatever it is. You know, if I go to the internet again, unless Heather's aware of it, unless it's negatively impacting Heather, my children, if it's just my personal thing, I will get so lost on the internet. It'll be days later. I'm like, oh yeah, I was going to.
Okay, so I feel like I should say here, our conversation, this matches the conversations we have in our office.
All the time.
One of us will say, hey, I'm looking at this. What do you think? And the other one talks for 20 minutes about their backyard. And then we get to the text.
Exactly.
Or we sit down to talk about the backyard and end up spending 20 minutes with discipleship. So
that reminds me of this story in the Bible. Yeah, exactly.
So those of you that have just now sat through 5 minutes, I apologize.
Sorry.
And on to the sermon. So great job on Sunday. That was really good stuff. The idea of power and putting it into, like, coming from that illustration of the now I just lost the name of the group that sings I Got the Power.
Oh, Snap.
See, okay, I wanted to say Snap, but I thought no, that
nobody would name themselves Snap.
Right.
That's a guaranteed one-hit wonder name right there.
But and this doesn't have anything to do with the sermon. I listened to it a second time this morning, and I thought, I am so grateful to get to team with you in preaching, because I think that's not what I would have picked out. Like, that's not what I would have come from. But I look at the text, and I'm like, man, that needs to be said. And it was so good, but I just wouldn't have thought of that. And I feel like I really appreciate that we get to do this. And now, so now I'm afraid our Memorial people watching this, and they'll think, yeah, you and I need more help. But I think that's the beauty of the body, hearing from more people.
Right.
Because when Dan Langdon preaches and Trent Taylor preaches and Dan Rucker, and anytime Bob Logston gets up to talk, Craig Wills, like, every voice brings a different perspective.
So
and it's so important.
Yeah, one day you were really sick on a Saturday, and so you'd give me a heads up. You probably wouldn't be able to do it on Sunday, so I took your text, and you'd actually even sent me your points, but they made no sense to me. I mean, they made sense, but I couldn't, there was no traction there for me.
Yeah, so, you don't have to clean it up. I get
it. So anyway, let's just say from now on, we can say, what do we call them? They were unlearned and ordinary, and ordinary is idiot. Yeah, it's idiotas or something in Greek. I'm like, you were ordinary. But I had this lesson in my mind, and then ended up Sunday morning, you were good. I mean, you felt a lot better. You got up and preached, and I was amazed. I mean, I was like, that is so good. And now I see where your points fit on the paper, but it was so different than me. It was like David trying to put on Saul's armor, and neither of us are the bad Saul in this story. I'm simply saying I couldn't wear your armor. And I felt this way with Terry too, that he never made me put on his armor. You know what I mean? He's like, we have the same mission, but we're going to get about it. And I love it. You are one of my absolute favorite preachers. And I mean, that is just such an amazing thing for me when I don't have to preach and I get to hear you. It never happens that you preach something and I was like, oh, I thought that already. That just doesn't happen, And that's the beauty of the living word and the beauty of our individual design. But as you said, not just you and I, but man, we're so privileged at Memorial.
Yeah. I've told people this, and I don't know that they believe me necessarily, but when I tell people, you and I both, we love it when it's our day to preach, and we love it when it's not our day to preach. Like, it's a weird dynamic.
It's privilege. These are the good old days. I don't know how long God will give us to do this, but man, when people say, how do you survive with two preachers? I'm like, how do you not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I feel so super spoiled by it. I'm like, man, I would hate to do it another way. And it's not because I don't want to preach every Sunday. That's immaterial to me. It's the idea of, it's a different kind of feeding to hear somebody else who's a disciple of Jesus really process it with all the uniqueness God built in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it even makes me think to our small group on Wednesday night. I just could be misremembering it because I saw it through my own lens, but I don't remember us talking about power. Like it was a different conversation there. So
Yeah.
when Mrs. Cheatham and Chris May are talking, there's still a whole different flavor involved. So
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
also you had me at tacos. So once tacos makes an appearance.
Yeah.
So anything that you wish you would have been able to talk about, anything that you feel like you left out that you wish you would have said?
Yeah, there is one thing I'll say for the second part. By the way, everybody, this is a two-parter. We'll go for another 10 minutes with this, and then we'll switch over to the art of preaching, if you will, to the degree that we're amateur artists, I perceive. The thing that I would say specifically to that is, with the dynamic of power, it's not so much that I left it out as much as really trying to craft it in a way that it's accessible. Oftentimes, when you're talking about the power of God expressed through anything miraculous, we get really hung up on that, and I think we do it subconsciously, in the sense that we say, okay, here's a story from the Bible. Now go and be like Peter and John. And the first thing we tell ourselves is, well, I can't miraculously heal anybody. And we think that's the linchpin of the story. Does that make sense? We think the miracle is the linchpin of the story. We're like, without the miracle, none of this would have happened. Now I do think that's the way God chose to show up. I don't at all think that we can believe that Peter and John were like, okay, here's our strategy, with this. We'll go to the temple, we'll find the lame guy, as if going to pray is like some kind of, what's that word, subterfuge. I don't know if I said that right, but some kind of, we're going to pretend like we're going to pray, but we're really setting ourselves up. This is not some evangelistic method. This was just normalcy. And the issue was their willingness, Peter and John's willingness to accept the power of God. And believe in it, like accept it as an ongoing reality. And this is it. I think we say, well, I have never really seen, I'm always interested, I ended with, how have you seen the power of God at work in your life? And I knew I had to put a disclaimer on it, because people would say, well, never, and I'm like, well, think about it this way. In looking back, what have you overcome that you're like, how did I even get through that? And see, I think it's because we come from such a, and I don't want to get started on history, but we come from such a dynamic of we've got to be able to see it, measure it, touch it, taste it, for it to be real. And a lot of times when you're going through hard times, you don't notice when the things change. You feel the relief, but you don't recognize, hey, God did that. I was really scared of my boss and what he was going to say. And then I got to work and he said nothing. But we don't call that miraculous, because we're trained to ignore it. We're trained to ignore that. And we're trained to take on, well, that's coincidental, or how stupid I was to fear. What if you weren't stupid? What if your fear was exactly reality, that you were going to get fired and God worked in your boss's life? But see, we think we can't use our imagination like that. We think it's wishful thinking. And I think that's how Peter and John lived. They walked in not knowing they were going to heal the lame man, but they walked in fully believing that God would show up. And I believe Christians don't believe it. I've been raised around Christians all my life.
Sorry, I muted myself because an airplane was going over.
Oh, I got you. I assumed you were just speechless.
Yeah. The phrase, sometimes we feel like we got lucky.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to that idea of strategy. We think we have to strategize it. And so if something works well and we didn't strategize it, we think we got lucky. And yeah, so being content with, this is what is unfolding before me, or this is Peter's words, I don't have gold or silver, but what I have I'll give to you. Just that this is what I have right now. This is what I can do. And instead of us just being fortuitous or getting lucky, if God's going, this was your mission for today. I'm sorry, you thought it was to run to Lowe's to get some more wood.
Right.
This side point was your mission, and I even wondered, does he feel camaraderie, gratefulness when we step into the work with him? You know, the
Right.
same way I felt with my kids in the backyard working is just so much more fun with my kids back there, and they're pretty big now, so there's not like a whole lot of training and teaching like they know most. A lot of what we're doing building the garden, they're teaching me because they've got more experience building. But it is just side by side, sharing, hard work, sweating together, that just feels like there's a how I'm thinking of the word economy of grace, but I'm not a big fan of that phrasing.
So let me ask you this. It's just popped in my head. And again, I would say this is us walking with the Spirit in real time.
Mhm.
How do you set your kids up for success? And think very basic. You know, I mean, if you have a complex thing, but I mean, in its most basic terms, how do you as the adult in the situation, as a leader, set your kids up for success?
So set out clear expectations. This is what we are going to do, and this is how it will look in the end. And so then, when needed, step by step, this is what you do to meet this expectation. Is that what
Right.
you're?
Yeah, so that's one important aspect. You gave them a yard. I'm thinking really basic here. You gave them a yard. You weren't in an apartment saying, "Look, go find a berm to build," or is that the right word, berm? You gave them shovels. You know, I don't assume you said get your own shovels. You know, you gave them the security that they could fail. Now, that's over the years. That's not just on Saturday, because we will not participate in something outside of fear. We will not participate in something that we know we'll fail at, or we know that if we fail, there'll be harsh consequences. You know, you've given them safety, you know, to do that. That contrast in, I think it's in the Sermon on the Mount, but that idea of, you know how to give your kids good gifts, and you're evil in comparison to God. How much more will He give you His Holy Spirit, which means His active power in your life, and not just all power, word power, thinking power, peace power, grace power. You know, that's interesting in the text there in Acts 4. He said their grace was powerful. Well, what's the difference between offering grace and powerful grace? I don't know, but the fact that he uses those words says to me it exists, you know. And my point is, you set your kids up for success, and you're evil, you know, by comparison. How much more is God setting you up for success? The problem is, because we don't physically witness Him setting us up for success, we don't see Him setting out the shovels and, you know, directing us with the directions, that we assume He's not. Because many of us that are raised in churches were taught, whether it was meant to or not, that you've got the rules, you better make it happen. You know, so there's the fear again. So we don't want to try at all. Instead of saying, you walk with a Father that wants to set you up for success all the time. And it's always going to be framed in, I'm going to Lowe's, which, by the way, is a personal nightmare to me. Every time I have to go to a Lowe's, it's just a reminder, I don't fit here. But even in that, God's saying, Jason, when you notice a need in your life, oh, I need to go buy a doorknob lock or whatever, don't see that as unspiritual. See that as, how will God's power show up? And if it doesn't in a way you can tell, that's fine. It's not a failure. Yeah, there were other trips that Peter and John made that there wasn't a big deal, you know?
Yeah, I feel like this is the line in the sand with my dad that other people attribute it to. Oh, that's Terry, and this is that's Terry. It's when he's at Lowe's, he's paying attention to the people around him. You know, when he's talking to the cashier, when he's talking to the young guy next to him looking for door handles or nails. He just pays attention, and he's not afraid. I've been with him at times when he'll say something to somebody, and they'll give him a dirty look, or they'll kind of, and he'll look at me and go, like, I guess that was supposed to talk to you today. And it's like, man,
That's right.
That dirty look and that scowl doesn't dictate. So now I'm going to stop trying to love people, because that's all he's doing is trying to, where's a door here to show somebody that I really think they matter. And I know I've gone to restaurants with him that it'll be like for a season, his morning coffee. And he'll say, yeah, the owner here, man, I don't know if he'll say he doesn't like me, but it'll come across in those terms. Like, I've really tried to reach out to him, and man, he just doesn't like me, or he doesn't like God, or he doesn't say he doesn't like God, but it's obvious Dad has been just trying to find a way into that man's life, and he's been rejected, but he still goes and he still tries. And I think that's the watching for it constantly and just being aware. The Holy Spirit has a plan today, and it's kind of a build your own adventure. Is this it? Is this it? Let me turn over to this one. Oh, that wasn't it.
Right. Yeah, I think that is great. And Terry's probably one of the best example I personally have interacted with over time is that, let's take the coffee shop owner who we'll name Seymour, because that's just the name that popped in my head. So you're working with Seymour, and you keep saying kind things, and you're trying to make connections, and you say, hey, this is a great cup of coffee, or whatever it is, and Seymour keeps rejecting you, but there's not another door open, that all of a sudden some shift in life and just, you're not going to that coffee shop anymore or whatever. And so you keep having the opportunity. So you keep taking it. Okay. What is God accomplishing working with me when I'm rejected? He's saying, Jason, are you trusting the results, or are you trusting me? Which is a critical lesson for us to learn, because we want the results. We don't want the trust. We want the victory. We want to see the walls fall down, but we don't want to walk around the town, for 7 days, And so God's saying, do you understand the victories will come and go? It's the trust that's going to last. So every time I interact with Seymour and I'm trusting him, I'm building the muscles in me that God needs for me to have. For Seymour's sake, he's thinking, I can't trust this guy. I can't trust this guy. Well, what's going to break through that if God is going to use me to be a connection with him? Because God may only choose me to be one example in his whole lifetime. But what he's going to do, oh man, this guy stays after it even when I'm mean to him. This guy stays after it even when I ignore him. And then that's probably not enough. Something will happen in Seymour's life that will say to him, I need to find somebody that cares about me. He won't articulate it that way, but he'll just feel drawn to you. I've had this happen multiple times in my life where I've reached somebody they reject, something happens in their life, and now I'm a trusted person. And I'm like, how did that happen? Well, it's not rocket science. Now it's supernatural, mysterious, but so that's a dynamic that practices.
So why I think this matters today, when 10 years ago, a little bit over 10 years ago, I went with Dad to baseball camp. It was the one time I got to go. And I was amazed at how people would just open up to me, and they would just start talking to me and telling me about hardships in marriage or kids. And I really thought, why is this guy telling me this? Like, this is not a normal conversation to have with somebody, for it to be your second conversation. And
absolutely.
Part of the reason I decided was Dad. Dad had been investing with these men for, some of them, 2 decades or more. So I kind of had an in, like, I must know Tim because I know his dad. But then the other thing was, everybody hurt so much physically. Like, I was the young guy, and immediately blew my my hamstrings out and hurt to run. And I'm the young guy, so I have to run for all the old men that can't run, because they hurt worse than I do. Like everybody there was in grave pain, but we're playing baseball and we're having a blast. But pain was just a part of it. And so there's something about when you are hurting together, like when you are a part of the Walking Wounded Corps, it's okay to talk about things, and it's okay to be open, and it's a different level of it's all right to share. And I think we're going through that right now as a world where everybody is in this weird liminal space of what is going to come of this. Everybody knows somebody who's lost a job. Everybody knows somebody who, I don't know anybody who's died from COVID, but I know people that have been sick, and we get really concerned. So we are all in this liminal space of unknowing and fear. And isn't that just like God to say, hey, this is the fertile ground. So pay attention pay attention to those you're around, that you've got to be careful how you talk to them 6 feet away and with a mask.
Okay, so that I may talk about this tomorrow on my Facebook Live, but this has been swirling in my head, and this is a perfect lead into it. So this is an ideal time to connect woundedness, and woundedness. If a person that's watching this isn't comfortable with that term, just pain. You know, we're all dealing with some level of discomfort, pain, and that's a connector. And if you don't believe that, that should be another conversation. But I just need you to know we connect in our weakness, not in our strength. And so if that's true, then what's our enemy, the devil, going to be doing? He's going to be getting us frustrated and judgmental with the people that don't handle it like we do. So I'm just noticing it, and it's going to get more, where you've got two camps. You've got one camp that says, these people don't care about me because they're not wearing masks and they're too close and they're not paying attention. And you've got another group that's saying these people are all giving into their fear because they're wearing their mask and they're practicing social distancing. Okay. Each side can make an argument for their case, and it's flawed. But this is what the devil does to us as a culture. He's been doing it to us politically. He's been doing it to us for years. It's every ism that's in culture comes down to this: is the way I see life. I will invariably find out that a way another person sees life differently, and I will take that as my enemy and not see the true enemy. It's the devil's greatest tactic, is to get you not to see the true enemy. So we think, oh, I can't believe that bedroom community opened up and they're doing all this. And I'm not talking medically. I'm talking spiritually here. It's not what's the right decision. It's how are we letting the devil affect our attitude and become condemning. We become the opposite of powerful grace. We become strict judgmentalists on the other framing. And and the devil is crouching at our door, if you will, all the time with this, because I feel it in myself that as soon as I see somebody do it different than me, my judgment, and it's not to say that wisdom doesn't need to be shared. If a person is really letting fear rule their life, there needs to be wisdom there. If a person is really being uncaring, because I've talked to people in our churches that I will not wear a mask. I'm not giving into fear. And I'm like, that's never been the issue. Now, are there people wearing masks because they're afraid? I'm sure that's true, but it's that dynamic that we have to be really vigilant about, that this is never me against you. It's me against the devil alongside you. But again, the devil's main tactic is to say, don't notice me, notice that guy that's doing it different than you would do it.
Unmute. I just wonder, thinking about our charge to pick up our cross, to die to ourselves, it feels more real than idealized now. Like how do I pick up my cross for those that disagree with me? Like how do I die to myself in those interactions? How do I die to myself Um, yeah, I'm going to mute myself as another plane is coming in.
Yeah, I'll switch gears here to part two, to the art of preaching, if you will. And by that, I'm not proposing we are artists. We're learners of the art of preaching. Uh, this is a confession, and so I feel really goofy about saying it. I feel a little bit vulnerable. It's a vulnerability in me. But the thing that bothered me most about my sermon on Sunday was the size of my head. I have had body image issues for years, and I rarely share this in a live group because if I do, people will come up and tell me I look fine. And it misses the point entirely. It has nothing to do with what you think about me. It has to do with messages in my own head. I come from family. My family is all overweight. And I'm not saying that to condemn them. It's just a biological fact, a genetic fact, maybe a nurture fact as well. You know, we've always been really big eaters and overeaters and that kind of thing. And I'm not trying to throw anybody on the bus. I'm just saying that's a observable fact in our gatherings. And so I've been super self-conscious. Conscious. I will not, before this, I would not Skype with people, FaceTime with people. If somebody would FaceTime me, I'd hang up and call them because my head in that screen looked so big. And the reason it popped out on Sunday was I was so close to the camera. And that brings up another point I want to speak to in a minute. But I felt so self-conscious watching myself. And I bring that up to say, one of the reasons, one of the biggest fears of all humanity is public speaking. I mean, statistically, that keeps coming to the top. And I think the reason is, and this is the more transferable point to you, is that the devil wants to squelch your voice in general, whether it's one-on-one or in front of a group. The devil always wants to squelch your voice, especially if you're a disciple of Christ, okay? And the way he's going to do it is he's going to bring your deepest fears to light. And it's first and foremost inside yourself, long before anybody else responds that way. Every judgment you have against yourself will show up when you try to stand for Christ. It's the devil's way of saying, this is too uncomfortable, this is too awkward, I just need to stop. And so I don't know if you're unmutable, so I don't want to, if you've got something to add, feel free. But that's the first thing that jumps out at me about this sermon, about, man, what I would tweak. It's not even my head being so close. I need to speak to that in a minute. But it's the idea of that self-judgment coming up while I watch myself.
Yeah. Even as you're talking, I feel myself trying to talk without opening my mouth, because I see my teeth, and I think if we keep doing videos, I'm going to have to get braces. This is just a horrible. I'm going to have to get braces and major teeth whitening. And that's not to say anything about growing hair. It is a horrible thing to see yourself. And I've not thought about it in terms of the spiritual side of that, of Satan wants us to, man, every message that you've taken on of, everyone, you're ugly, you don't fit, you don't matter. Satan wants that to be what's in your head instead of sharing good news.
Yeah.
We've talked about this when I feel like we've talked about it here, but I'm not sure. But I will think to myself, I want to sound smart. I want to be funny. And what happens is I sound like a jerk. Like whenever I want to make sure people know I'm intelligent, what I communicate is I'm a jerk. And so I think if anybody's ever listened to me preach or just talk and they walk away going, Tim's a jerk, they've not misjudged me. Like that's an accurate judgment, because it comes from a time when I do want to, and it's a message that says you're not smart enough to be talking right now. You're not good enough at what you do. So you better come across smarter. You better come across witty. And so when that rises to the top and I go with it, I can step aside and look at myself, usually in retrospect, sometimes even in the moment. And in the moment, I don't know how to clean it up, and so I just power through and it just gets worse. But yeah, so if anybody's ever thought, man, Tim's just a jerk, you're not misjudging. You're right.
Yeah. Can I tell you something stupid? When you started talking about that, I it's not about you, so just to be clear, it's stupid about me. But something I just recognized myself when in these recordings in particular, when I'm listening to you talk, I become aware of my breathing. I don't notice it when I'm talking, but I become aware of my breathing. And this is one of those things. Everything that hurts you or bothers you about you didn't start right now. Sometimes people get married and they say, man, my husband or my wife is worse for me. But then when you get down to the actual problems, those are problems that they've struggled with since they were little kids. It's invariably true. I grew up with bad allergies, and I've got bad allergies right now. Okay. And so my nose, I've had surgery on my nose. I take medicine for it, but I'm just congested a lot of times, especially in the season. So I can't breathe through my nose. 10 years ago was the first time I recognized people were saying mouth breather is an equal statement to somebody that's stupid or undeveloped or uncultured. You know what I mean? So what happens is I start thinking I'm breathing through my mouth. And so I close my mouth and I'm trying to breathe through my nose, but I'm talking, this is happening. As soon as I stop talking, this will happen. And so I will not be getting enough air, and then I'll be short of breath, and then I'll have to cover my mouth. And if you look back in this recording, I'm doing it. I'm taking in breaths because I feel so self-conscious that I'm a mouth breather. And this, when I say it out loud, it feels so stupid, but bring it to the point of preaching. Whatever your thing is, the devil will maximize it against you. And you either, and I think there are some people that they mitigate that by having structure. I'm going to read this and read this and read this, but most people can't do that and still have passion. I think most people that really love Jesus, many preachers, even if they preach in what we consider monotone or dry, it has much more to do with their sense of I have to lock this down than what's really going on in their heart, And because my story is I didn't want to be a preacher, I just took from the beginning, once I saw God putting me, well, if he's bringing me, he must want me to do it, not me to become like somebody else. So I tried to give up on doing it right and just, okay. And honestly, it was a little bit of, this sounds bad, but this is bad. I'll just say it. Death by cop. I felt like, God, you keep putting me in preaching situations. If I keep being me, I'll eventually screw it up so bad that you'll give me something else because I don't want to do this. This is how deep this runs in my head. And he just kept giving me success in that area, which is stupid to me. But here we are, But that's that point. Now, I want to switch gears real quick, and don't if you need to jump. But do you have something on those lines? Okay. One of the funny things for me, so I don't know if this is true for you, so, if you'd speak to this. So when I recorded myself, number one, I recorded myself 4 times doing the whole sermon. And one time was because on all my other recordings, I've done it in at least I've done one in one take. Everything else has been one take. And once I had to do 2 takes because I just forgot a verse entirely. So, but since I was doing it for myself in my own room and nobody else was there, I did it 4 times. And in all those times, I had one main thought about the camera, and it was look at the camera and not at the screen. Now keep in mind, a phone is only this big. You know what I mean? It's not a big thing, but I was so fixated on keeping my eyes on the camera, I was not noticing my face on the screen. And in my last recording, my 4th recording, that was the first time I had looked over and saw how close I was. And I said, oh, I'm kind of close. And I backed up. And then I need you to know, at least the way I preach, that thought was gone. After I said that, I backed up and just forgot it because I was back on make sure you're not looking at the screen, look at the camera. Now keep in mind, the space between is what? This? This maybe, if the dead center of my face. And I've done that in preaching multiple times. I had a situation where I had a preaching teacher. So you'd prepare a sermon, and then they would critique it, in training and preparation. And so I had prepared, and this guy emphasized the solidity of the outline. Make sure your outline is solid. And he just kept doing. Ed Wharton is the man, if that name means anything to other people. I know Tim knows it. But Ed Wharton was like, you must have a solid outline and stick to that outline and, execute it perfectly, And he had ate me up on a previous sermon, about you're not doing this. So I'd worked really, really hard. And the day I was to preach, I came in and I did it. I executed that sermon perfectly. But Ed was sick and Richard Rogers was there. And Richard Rogers crushed me on the YBH, the yeah, but how. Now, keep in mind, when I preached to Ed, I was preaching to Ed. I wasn't preaching to 100 people, or even the other students in the room, because Ed decided whether I got A's or B's. You know what I mean? I didn't care about the other students. They could think I was horrible or beautiful. I didn't care. Richard Rogers had a whole different worldview of judgment. And I preferred Richard's over Ed's, honestly, but I didn't think Richard would be my teacher. And I think that's the dynamic. I've preached sermons and people come up and say, why didn't you touch on this aspect of it? And I'm like, have you ever tried to take 4 hours worth of content and squeeze it into 25 minutes? Do you know how hard it is to take hours of study and squeeze it in 20 minutes? I just think people have no clue of how hard it is to choose what to leave out in a sermon. And that's not even including the stuff you leave out that you didn't mean to, that you got another line and talk about it. So anyway, but that's a perfect example of you're focused on one aspect in the sermon and you miss this other obvious aspect.
And the self-critiquing that you do to yourself. Okay, so I saw this quote today, Charles Spurgeon. Man, I could find it here. That says something about when someone thinks little of you, don't be upset with them because you are really much horrible than they know, or something like that. And I think, when people critique sermons, it's like when they do, I feel defensive. But the truth is, I feel much worse. Right. The things I'm saying to myself about, oh, you forgot this. How could you forget this?
Yeah, absolutely. Hang on just 1 second. I want to grab something. I don't know if I'll be able to show this to you. Yeah, you can see it.
Hey, that's it.
This is the quote. Heather has these pictures all around our mirror and the children's mirror in the bathroom. Not just this quote, of course, but all different kinds of quotes. Some of them playful, but all of them are about character and this kind of dynamic. That is so good. And it's so important when you're talking to somebody else to realize that even the hardened person, well, why they're hardened is they feel terrible about themselves. It is always a truth. And they're trying to compensate or protect. But that is so important. When I have a critique of a person, I'm not saying don't give that critique. Just like you wouldn't say, don't come to me with actual feedback. We want feedback. We want to get better. We want to tune in more to God and His Spirit. We certainly want to be corrected if we're missing some interpretation of the Bible that's clear. But it is that idea. You always have to assume the critique that you're giving is a small drop in a sea of critiques they're giving themselves all the time. And I do think there's something about the preaching dynamic, and Memorial is a church that is gentle. I get corrected so little at Memorial. I'm a guest speaker at places that correct me more than my own family does at Memorial. So, I'm very grateful for that. But it is one of those things. It's easy to judge that 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever the sermon is, and miss bigger points, and that is really true.
Yeah, so I wonder, what is it about me? And I'm putting this on everybody else. I assume it's true about everybody else, but I know it's true about me, that I know I am flawed and get things wrong. Like even there, I mispronounce flawed somehow. But when you bring it up, when you bring up a very specific, this is how you're flawed, I get defensive. And even in the moment, like I either totally disagree or in the moment I completely agree. And oh, you're right, I need to change that. And it's almost like um, I flip flop and completely agree with you. And then I'll walk away and go, man, that's not true. Why did I totally agree with somebody? Like, what is it about me? But what is it about me that can't evaluate clearly in the moment when and it feels like a threat to my identity comes up. You didn't do this well, and I can't just acknowledge, okay, I'm a flawed person. Let me take that in. Yeah. Instead, I have these defenses that go up of either you are exactly wrong or you're way too right. And neither of those are right.
Man, I love this. I have said to people, who in here is perfect? Raise your hand if you're perfect, or raise your hand if you're not perfect, And we say as a shield, and it's a correct statement, I'm only human. I'm only human. It cracks me up, though, about us as humans. You're like, I'm only human. And you're like, you're right. And here's one of the human aspects you have. No, that's not true. Yeah. Well, what about this? Well, that's not true either. You know what I mean? It's like you just said you're flawed, and yet you won't own a single flaw, and that is so human. You talk about flawed, which I didn't know. I didn't notice you'd mispronounced it, which that's the other thing. We're much more usually, let me say this. I think you're either hyper aware or under aware, not underwear, but under aware. And I think that's most people are hyper aware. I don't know a lot of under aware people, but anyway, I need to change that terminology. I get it. But anyway, so the dynamic of hyper aware is you notice it twice as quick, and then we could also introduce, what an Enneagram type, personalities, disposition, you're raising, your learning style, all of those factor in. But if you take something as specific as pronunciation of words, my brother Aaron, I say all these things because I don't think they'll ever listen, and maybe they will now. But it's funny, but I remember he and Laura were having a discussion about how to say, now I don't know how to say it right now, comfortably, instead of comfortably. And I don't, right now, I can't even draw to mind what the right pronunciation is, but you can look it up. And what was funny is we were all at the house together and they started discussing this, and they weren't arguing. It was funny to them at the moment, but I know how that feels, where it's funny on this level, but you're like, but if we were alone, I'd be angry with you. And one had a pronunciation from a British, online they're like a British voice, and another was an American English voice, and they were both right. You know what I mean? I remember, in a meeting with we were at Subiaco last year or 2 years ago, and it came up in a casual side conversation. Where do you put the apostrophe when a word ends in S? And I was taught you write like Jesus, you write Jesus and apostrophe, and other people believe it's Jesus apostrophe S. Okay. Now here's the truth. Grammatically, both are acceptable. If you look it up, both are acceptable. But Clint Davis, who's been writing this for years because it's his last name, he was saying it's apostrophe S, and I was saying it's just apostrophe. And even looking it up, saying we're both right, I know we still thought the other one was wrong. I know he still thinks I'm wrong. And this is us as humans. It's a deficit, but it's not an abnormal deficit. The question is, am I making progress in not letting it rule me? Which in that regard, being a preacher is a tremendous opportunity, because there's no end to the criticism, in that regard.
And yeah, going back and watching your own, which my brother Dusty has told me, if you want to get better at preaching, listen to your sermons, better watch your sermons, and you'll have to get better. And so in the 4 years I've been at Memorial, I've done that twice. because it's so hard. It's so painful. And one of them, I watched it because I knew that was a great sermon. You know, I rarely feel like that was a great sermon, but it felt like that was a great sermon. So I went back and watched it. I was like, don't ever do that again. Don't ever convince yourself now it's safe to go back in the water. And so now we have to, because we record these earlier in the week and then we sit down with our families and watch it. And oh man, it's not just watching your own sermon, it's watching it with your family. Oh man, but it is it's a growing. I remember having to record a speech for Texas Tech when I was taking some comms class there. And I remember thinking, I don't do that. I don't do this the whole time I talk.
Yeah.
But that's what was on the video. Oh man.
It is. It's funny. Easter Sunday, I preached, and I asked my family, and they could not tell me good enough things about it. I did not do a good job. In my mind, it wasn't a good sermon. And then so 2 days ago on Sunday, when I preached, I didn't even ask. I did not ask, you know, and I'm hearing my family say, man, it was so good seeing all the faces, and man, I love this song.
Sir.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Instead of muting myself, I should have put pause on the recording.
Oh, yeah.
One of these days.
But I'm watching, you know, I'm just listening, you know, and they're talking about all these other things, and they didn't say one good thing about my sermon, you know. And so is that right? Yeah, it's absolutely right. They have a right to say whatever they want. Should I not be worried at all what they think? Yes. Should I not be worried at all about what I think? That's an interesting question. You know, and in other words, it's done. The sermon's done. You know what I mean? I can't go undo it. I can't make people unsee it, you know. And I'm like, it was like an offering that I offered at the altar, and now I can nitpick it. You know what I mean? I can say, oh, my head was so big, or I was too close to camera, or whatever, you know. But it's done. You know what I mean? And it's like every other thing in my life. If I get over focused on what I think about what I just did, I will not do it in the future. Or let me put it this way, I will be much less likely to do it in the future. And when I do it, I will be more focused on avoiding my mistakes than I will trusting in God. And it is such a good discipline to me to not ask, how did I do? And it is hard work. The word discipline is exactly right. I have to discipline myself not to ask. And it was a good contrast to me, because the week before, they said good things. They said really nice things to me and very specific things, but I still couldn't get beyond that judgment. And it was just good to see the contrast of, it doesn't matter what they think or what I think. Now, I'm not suggesting critique isn't important in listening. I'm simply saying of that dynamic. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is such a, like, I feel like even this conversation is weird. Now I'm conscious of how I said the word weird, because everybody's different. Everybody has their style, and you want to be true to who you are while growing in your ability to communicate well. So listening to critique, but not being owned by critique, but it's important. And
Yeah.
so how to accept it and not shut down because of it, and how not to live by it, you know, how not to live by the praise or die by the critique. Yeah, it's a weird business to be in.
It is. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we took a deep dive into at least my psyche. I think we got into your psyche a little bit. We'll try not to do that again, maybe. I don't know. But I certainly hope that it's a blessing for those of you, as always, for those of you that made it this far. Wow, look at you. Thank you. And as I said before, or as we've shared, if you have questions or comments, catch us on. We'll post this to our Facebook, and so post it there. We don't have comments on YouTube because, to be honest, I get confused of trying to track down the comments on Facebook, and that's about my digital. I need one place to go to try to figure things out. So that's why we don't have it directly on the video. But yeah, please comment on Facebook or ask questions or corrections. We want, this makes us better, and your voice would be important too. Thank you so much to people that have fed back to us, Mary and Gigi, and I don't know if I'm missing somebody.
David Buchanan.
Janet of tuning in and this being beneficial. That helps us to know we will always have these conversations. The question is, will we record them and put ourselves up for like public embarrassment? So that's
more scrutiny.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, well, thank you, Tim.
Thanks, man.
I appreciate this. Love you. Bye.
Love you, man. Bye.